Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. My name is Tristan.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Sam.
And Ryan, your voice is familiar.
Yeah, I've been around this block before for sure. Joining you for the Trivia from the Bridge episodes.
That's right. It's good to have you with us.
Glad to have you on this side of the podcast.
This is our very first film club episode. I love Alien. I'm looking forward to talking about it. And I think from time to time, we'll have others join us. James will probably pop into some film club episodes. We're also going to end this episode with some trivia on Alien, I think. So I'm going to try and stump you guys.
Hey, and remember, if you like what you hear, we always appreciate a like and a subscribe, a review. And even more so, we enjoy it when our listeners reach out to us with recommendations, be it movies or books, topics to talk about on science fiction, science fact. When we hear from you, we take it seriously and we do respond. Like, subscribe, review. We appreciate it.
And you can even let us know any recommendations on Instagram or Facebook. There's a Facebook group for Tales from the Bridge. And if this is your first episode, go back and check out other episodes. We talk about books a lot. We have many amazing authors and filmmakers on the show. So go back and check out past episodes. We have lots out there.
All right, well, let's get into it.
All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys have heard. I'm excited about this, but there is going to be a remake for Enemy Mine. Do you know about this one?
So I actually don't. I didn't realize they were remaking it, first of all. And it was never, this was not part of my childhood. I'm sorry. I can't share this particular memory with you, but tell me about it.
So it's a Wolfgang Petersen film from 1985, Dennis Quaid, Louis Gossett Jr. I loved this movie when I was a kid. It was unlike any other film because it showed the one species, the Dracs. They were actually sexless, or perhaps they were males and then turned into females, but they could give birth, and you always thought that the main character was a male. So it had this weird twist. And then the human character ends up raising the child alone. And it's a beautiful film. It's what Wolfgang Petersen did after The Neverending Story. So I'm excited for this one. It's a film that's going to be brought to life by Terry Matalas, who is no stranger to the science fiction genre. And he's most recognized for being the showrunner of the latest Star Trek Picard season, or maybe the last two, actually, season 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So he actually, I guess he's been the Picard's been well received enough for this Terry Matalas to be able to get a budget, get this movie in action. And I think this will be a great movie. And I hope to get Dennis Quaid to come back to reprise the role, but they probably won't.
Yeah, that's always tough. That's
so
interesting.
Little bit of homework for you then is go check that one out.
All right, will do. That's interesting, especially just the idea of like the kind of gender roles and that kind of piece, right? And no, I had no idea. All right.
And I've got one more little bit of science fiction filmmaking news. The Murderbot Diaries is being turned into a show. We've talked about this a little bit in our book episodes.
Okay.
But that's Martha Wells's The Murderbot Diaries books. They're being turned into a TV show. And Alexander Skarsgård is playing the Murderbot, which is pretty cool. And they were just filming this about 20 kilometers from where I live in Ontario here.
Oh, very cool.
So that's being made, and I am super excited for that. Their main filming is in Toronto, and it should be ready for next year. But anyone who listens to the book episodes knows we love Martha Wells's books, and to see this one on TV is going to be pretty cool. I hope, at least, even though I don't really watch TV shows.
Yeah, you don't have the attention span. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. I might get into this. We'll see.
Nice. Well, I like Skarsgård. Right. I mean, I've definitely been a fan of him. He's got, I don't know. I mean, I feel like some people think maybe he's typecast, but I think he has more of a range than people give him credit for. So I'm curious to see what he does with it. Actually,
well, yeah. So. I saw him in Brandon Cronenberg's latest film, Infinity Pool, and that was did you watch that?
Yeah.
Oh boy, and see, I like really dark stuff, and that was horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of what qualifies, that's definitely, there's no question. Absolutely. Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
great one. So
We might have to do a few horror spin-off episodes, but yeah.
yeah, well, that's evidence of Skarsgård's ability and
Yeah,
his range for sure.
absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Nice.
Cool.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I always that's you've always been how I keep up on film news, so this will be a nice treat for me.
Yeah. Well, should we just jump into the first movie
Let's
of
do it.
Movie Club?
We did decide right off the bat that I was going to pick first, and it felt like a lot of pressure. It did. It took I racked my brain, and I kept coming back to like when I think of sci-fi at all, and I think of some of the first sci-fi that I can identify in my brain, came back to Alien. And of course thinking of the first Alien, but also just the entire franchise. But yeah, that seemed like a great kickoff point. Feels very like a seminal film in my life and in the culture and sci-fi in general. So yeah, and one of my favorite sci-fi directors as well. So
Yeah, I think it's the best pick that you could pick because it starts with the letter A. But also, it really is one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. I would argue that it's one of the greatest films ever made. I'm biased because it is one of my favorite films. Something I do want to say to listeners that there may be a ton of Alien fans out there that know so much about these films, and the first one from 1979 in particular. There's so many neat stories about the making of. There's so many great moments in this movie. There's so many great things that make this film so good. And we can't cover it all in this episode. Obviously, I hope though that we can, ignite some excitement in listeners to go and watch more YouTube videos on Alien, because there's so many on the making of or just how it happened, on Giger and his work, on Ripley and his work, and the many writers and producers. There's just so much to talk about. So we're probably just gonna, hit the tip of the iceberg on this one. But I hope it makes people excited to go out and watch Alien again if you haven't seen it in the last few years, because it's one of those films. Watch it every 3 years or so, or every couple of years, or once a year. It's just as good. It sometimes even gets better. So I just wanted to say that to the listeners that are joining us for our very first film club episode. One thing that I'll start off by saying is that this film, as much as it's the writer's film and the actor's film and the set designer's film and special effects, I really think that this is Ridley Scott's film and Giger's film, because it's the image and the vision from those two those are what you really see on the screen. The special effects, the set design, and the just that original painting by Giger. They've designed this film, and without Ridley Scott, this could have been a B film, which is kind of interesting to think about. Even though it was 20th Century Fox, this still could have been a very cheaply made, kind of not so great film, with the possibility of being a great film. But Ridley Scott came in and really had a vision and went from that painting Necronom 4. So in 1976, H.R. Giger painted the gorgeous painting Necronom 4, and this was the main inspiration for the Alien design, and in turn the kind of the design for a lot of the film and the color schemes and all these things. So I'm not sure if you guys knew, Alan Ladd was the head of 20th Century Fox when Star Wars came up. So he was the one that said, let's do this Star Wars thing. They weren't sure if it was going to be a success. They really didn't think it was going to be. They thought it was a silly kind of adventure sci-fi like all the rest of them. No one expected Star Wars to do what it did. And the truth is, you would not have Alien without Star Wars. And that's really neat because they're so different. I got to ask you guys, would you go Star Wars or Alien?
Well, it's like, Alien is the Rolling Stones to the Star Wars and the Beatles, and so it's two different, I like the Stones. I also like the Beatles. And so, they're two different movies. You'll like them for two different movies, and being two different movies, Luke Skywalker definitely got Alien green lit. It was sort of, if you look at some of the the history behind the making of the film. It was sort of floundering, and the script was sort of getting batted around, and it was like, I think it was called Star Beast. What, I got it here. The original name or something was originally, yeah, Star Beast, and which is terrible. So it certainly had. I think we have, you know, you talk to filmmakers, and they'll talk about how a really good film has a lot of hands in it, and so it sort of evolved into what it became, and thankfully, and even the writer wasn't, you know, that was O'Bannon and Shusett when they were writing it, had, you know, weren't thrilled with the name, and so when Aliens came on, they really glommed onto that, and I don't quite know where that came from, but maybe that'll come out in the trivia later. But it's, you know, getting back to that sort of Star Wars comparison, this is a horror film in space, which for me is what compounded the fear when I first watched it, right? Like, space is the great deep, you know, where anything can happen in the darkness. And it doesn't have to be supernatural. It could be, you suspend your disbelief that this creature lives out there in the deep, like the sea monsters of old, and come up and get you, or any sort of, you know, spacefarers down the way. So that's made it, that just made it scarier, and they're so far beyond help. They're on their own. They're stranded with this xenomorph that's like planting eggs in you, right? Like, it answers all the stuff, right? Like, you got a giant bug planting bugs in you, right? Like, it's perfect, you know, in that way. And so, yeah, when you ask that question, I like, man, it's like, you know, I didn't really worry about Luke, you know, getting impregnated by a xenomorph and having his chest blown out. And, you know, maybe that's for the good thing. You know,
cool. 10-year-old crossover one day.
8-year-old Sam appreciates that. But yeah, I remember watching Alien years after it got out, but it came out. I was just like, what is this? It felt new. And I watched it, I think about a year and a half ago again. We ended up doing the first three, and they all like really age well. Like, it really, really is still scary. And, you know, they did it right. You know, Ripley knew to kind of hold back on the beast, right? Like, you show the monster just rarely, lots of darkness and jump scares, right? It's and you got the gore on top of it. Yeah, it's scary stuff, man. Nothing close to Star Wars, in my opinion.
And I think it's an interesting comment that you made about, you never worried about Luke, and that sense of like how important stakes are, right? In general, in terms of people's investment in the narrative, right? And how, especially in the first one, but the second one as well, there's so much, even just with the camera work, that makes things feel isolating, right? It's a lot of close shots. It's a lot of intimate shots, right? Like, I think the widest shot in the entire first movie is the space jockey, right? That beautiful, gorgeous set piece that like almost didn't happen. That really like, it's a piece of lore on its own, right? That image of the space jockey that they come upon on the crash ship. But other than that, and a few other, you know, follow shots, it's all just like right there, right? You feel every breath, and you feel the fear, and yeah, the darkness and the shadow, and it's what you don't see, right? Like you say, the entire time, that just sucks you in. And yeah, it was the sparingness that they had of almost, I don't know, almost like similar to almost like Jaws, right? How there's so much holding off and holding off and holding off, and suggestion, so that when you do finally get a look at the thing, it's just such a, you know, such a terror, right?
You mentioned Jaws. That was something that was talked about among the filmmakers too, Jaws in space. And that's an easy way to sell something to a producer, right? Like, when they're pitching this and we got to do this. Another thing was Texas Chainsaw Massacre in space, because that had come out in 74. And for the horror buffs out there, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is kind of the best film. I want to also go back to the tight shots. Like, where do you ever see ceilings in a movie? You know, it's very rare. I think in Citizen Kane, Orson Welles was one of the first to say, we're going to put that camera down low and show the ceiling. And that was just crazy back then. Why do you want to see a ceiling? Like that's where the lights should be shining down on the actors. And Ridley Scott did a little bit of a callback to that. Something super interesting too is you don't know who the main protagonist is, especially in the first half almost. You kind of start to think it might be like if you didn't know anything about this movie and went into it, you didn't know that Ripley was going to be the main survivor at the end alongside the cat. You don't know who the main character is. You might have thought it was the captain. You might have thought it was, one of the other guys because that's what so many people were used to seeing. When they try bringing Kane in with the face hugger back into the shuttle, and Ripley's like, "You can't come in," and she's the only one following protocol, and you kind of that's when you start to see, okay, well, this might be the main character, and so she does turn out to be the main protagonist in the story. But it also gives clues to the fact that the captain has obviously been given orders to break the rules if you have to bring back this specimen if you find something. And that is creepy. That adds to the creepiness, that knowing that we never see Earth, we never see anyone giving commands. When we find out that Ash also has this motive to, keep this creature, to detain it and bring it back to Earth, that's creepy. There's some sort of other plan going on that we don't know about.
Yeah, the faceless corporation that also remains nameless largely throughout the course of the three movies. They do name them. They say the name, I think, maybe once in the second film, like Wayland Corp, right? Like but yeah,
the third one is when they really start to build that story.
Yeah. But yeah, that idea of that like faceless corporation being this like looming threat as well, and almost like a character, right, in the background, is and something that I think the first time you see it, you don't really think about it as much, but then as they build that up as part of the reason why things are going wrong, and what's motivating these people to make these terrible decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the later movies too, right? Like the corporate rep serves as the other bad guy, right? Like who shows up. We've talked a little bit about this on with some of the books we reviewed, where there's this growing notion of what corporate space looks like. And when you're in the outer reaches of space, there's no HR department and no health and safety, right? Oversight. And there's freedom for people to treat it like the Wild West, and corporations to do so, and risk people and personnel with little concern. And yeah, you get that. And yeah, Ripley comes in late as your lead character, and it kind of does it because if you did it too soon, you realize like, and you would know who's going to live, right? It's another way to raise the stakes. You're not quite sure who you're rooting for because you don't want to, like, let's face it, none of us want to root for the person who gets their head ripped off, right? Like we all want to root for the survivor. That's your sort of instinct. And she emerges as the one you kind of want to root for anyways, and that sort of works out nicely in that way. And I think they did a good job. Originally when they wrote the script, it was all males, and there was actually a push to include females, and she was one of the two characters whose script was flipped. So they had written them sort of in an androgynous manner that you could flip either one of them, any one of them if you really wanted to. But there is some story behind how they decided to go with a female lead. It's kind of interesting and a little ahead of its time, right? At a time where, particularly in sci-fi, if you look at like sci-fi literature of the time, women are treated as window dressing, right? It was all written by men for men. And so this really was innovative and refreshing side of the film that I think really helps it translate today. Like it's readable today in the same way, in a way rather that other films of the genre and other books of the genre aren't, right? They just don't age that well. And like and some classic, Philip K. Dick, I'm sorry, but he's not that kind to women in his books, right? Like it's not that, I don't find his stuff that readable, and that's been controversial here in the past, but I still stand by that. I think it's interesting that there was forward thinking casting and writing happening in the 70s. I mean, that is the second wave of feminist academic thought and what was happening at the time. Maybe that's more representative at the time, but it does sort of feel like it helps that movie last and become handed down as a favorite in the way that it has in a lot of ways because of those casting decisions early on.
And kind of incredible that even if you compare it to stuff that's written today, right, is very progressive in that sense, right? And I think was listed, maybe was one of the first films ever talked about within like the Bechdel test discussion, right? Which we don't have to get into here necessarily what the Bechdel test is, if you can Google it. But I believe Alien, the first movie, was actually like referenced in the very comic where that term was coined. Because it does actually, it's one of the few in that genre that does manage to pass that test by having the two female characters that have a conversation about something that isn't a man. So it sounds like it should be
Wow.
simple, but man, there is not a lot
Yeah.
that actually pass it, right? And their conversation is only her slapping her and giving her shit for not letting her in, but it still falls within that purview. And yeah. And I had heard that about how they had written it as a androgynous part initially, which is what makes it so interesting too that they ended up making that decision. And I'd be curious to know more of the thought process at the time behind that.
Something to point out too is this film is very logical. Even Star Wars and go back before, they're not necessarily logical. You know, whether it's hyperdrive, the Force, and then go back, you think of Logan's Run, think of the Forbidden Planet, all these other fun, good, entertaining, classic science fiction films. And I do think this is one of the first films to kind of have logic in almost every shot. You know, like the mechanics, when you're walking through at the very beginning, when you get kind of like that slow panning and that camera moving through the hallways, everything looks like it has a use. The way that everything works, they're in hypersleep. They're not going super fast. They're going as fast as they possibly can. But there's not. I mean, as much as there's a fantasy aspect to discovering aliens, that's as far as that goes. I mean, you could say that the Ash, the android's a bit fantastical, but not really. Like that's science fiction. So it's a very logical film. It's it just makes sense. And
even why they discovered the alien in the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
They weren't out there. They're not explorers. They're not going to look for these things. They're just contractors.
Exactly. And they ended up getting the signal, right? And again, the corporation puts their hand in, and that's a really good point. I never really thought of it as like a much less fantasy than a lot of the sci-fi of the time. Yeah, much more straightforward, and the idea that they're not traveling super fast, as you say, right? I mean, what is it between 1 and 2? 57 years pass, right? When she's just floating out there, and they, pass through what does he say? You pass through all the core systems and just happen to be picked up by some, people trying to junkers, basically, right? Looking for reclamation. Yeah.
And something that Sam mentioned as well was how it kind of covers so many fears. I just want to point those out a little bit too. Like, we're on you're claustrophobic in this ship, those tight corridors. Then we go and explore this planet that no one really wants to. They just want to get their, they're even arguing about getting their bonuses properly, and which also humanizes them. But then they land on this planet that's harsh. The wind is always, whenever you get those exterior shots, it's a high wind. It would definitely kill you without the proper outfits. When all our science fiction films before, you didn't need to, like it was Star Trek. They didn't need any protection when they land on a planet anytime. So that there's more logic. However, it's a harsh environment that's creepy again. Then we meet when we see the jockey, that's so creepy. Then we see the egg, and these are all different elements. A lot of horror has, and even just talk about Jaws again. There's one antagonist, and that's the creepy thing. And that's usually how a horror film runs. There's one bad guy. There's one Freddy Krueger. There's one Jason or whatever. Now we've got this face hugger who pops out, and no one wants to have something forced down their throat and then have something hatched inside, and then it bursts out of your chest. And then now we have this little guy that pops out, and then it turns into this giant thing that has obviously used your DNA to grow very quickly, to mix whatever it is that the xenomorph makes up to look completely different, and to live and survive off of probably eating a lot and laying more eggs, which we don't really find out too much about in that first film, the egg laying. But that's so intelligent that there's all of these creepy things along the way. it's almost two different movies from the beginning to the first half and the second half. You've got that space adventure, exploration, creepiness for the first half, and the second half is trying to avoid getting killed by this giant creature. It's the structure itself. I am constantly surprised by how this film got made. They had a lot of faith in the filmmakers to do that.
I think a lot of the credit goes to their art design, right? And costume design. It just to you start out with a very blue collar looking crew. They're not uniforms, they're not the clean Star Trek uniforms, right? Like they're wearing civilian clothes, kind of half this. Like one dude's in, I forget who it is in a Hawaiian shirt, right? Up until he goes, and so there is this sense of, uh, you know, space that is a little bit boring to the people who have to be in it. It's lived in a way that's convincing, that sells it. So yeah, like you've been on this ship for how many years? Like you're all kind of living in this space. You own this space, becomes human in this utterly terrifying creature designed by Hans Giger, like comes in and starts laying waste, right? Like it is your house out in space, invaded by a monster from the deep, right? Like it really does sort of, they did that really well, right? Like that the darkness of Giger to the sort of frat house living standards of the ship that they're on just sells it in a way that is, in a way, I think this is what brings it more to horror in my mind. And as much a thriller as it is, I do feel like I'm watching a bunch of like frat kids have Jason come into their party house and lay waste to Animal House, right? Like it's a bit of that too. So there's a lot of elements that kind of work because you can still picture yourself being murdered in that environment, right? I am less convinced of myself being murdered in a Star Trek environment, right? Like unless I'm wearing a red suit, right? Like I feel pretty safe in Star Trek, and far less so in this situation. And I think that art design really does amplify and give the final sell to that film, right? And I think it's a good part of the reason why it's so successful. But you're right, there's a ton of gambles that they had to take at the time, but Star Wars was big, right? So they were just pushing out all the sci-fi stuff they could, right? Like, but anyways, that's my take on that side of it. But I do think that you can't talk about Alien without talking about Hans Giger and the design of the monster and the art that that goes behind that, right?
It's so unique, his art, and he was on set all the time, and he got along with some people, but apparently was just very weird, very unusual, eccentric man, and that's so suitable for such an amazing artist. I love that.
Well, and I don't know, you mentioned the Hawaiian shirt, and I think that was Brett, right? I think Harry Dean Stanton's character,
Stanton,
Brett.
yep.
Yeah, and there's the scene when he's by himself and he goes into that one room that there's water dripping and
Oh,
the
that's
chain
so good.
and the chains are hanging, right?
And he's cooling off from
And
the
he's
water, and
and there's that moment, right, where he's just letting the water hit him. That is one of the most like tense moments, I think, in the
yeah,
entire film. And apparently it was a really big problem for a lot of the production team because everyone was fighting him on everything about it. They're like, why are the chains hanging? Why is there water? Like they had so many practical questions, and he was just like, shut up. It just builds a beautiful image, and it's the feeling I want to create, and it works. So, and then yeah, if you remove yourself from the moment and you think about all those things, yeah, fine. Why? None of it makes any sense. It doesn't matter, right? Because in that moment, in that space, with that person, you're just so terrified for him, and especially he was one of the characters that sort of like not no concern, but he definitely seemed like somebody who had like less concern than anybody else, right? He's kind of the easygoing guy. He's just he cares about his paycheck, right?
mhm.
Like you said, the blue collar type guy. But
And he is he's calling a cat, and
yeah,
so
he's
think
trying to find
about
Jonesy.
that.
Yeah,
Think
exactly.
about that. We have a science fiction film where it's a house cat. Like
Yeah.
It's I'm constantly, every time I watch it, I'm just blown away by how unique and real, logical, all these things are just it's weird that there is not another film like this, you know. And even the Alien films to follow, there's nothing like it.
And I do think that the evolution of the first couple films in particular, and kind of going back to what Sam was talking about with the idea of like, yeah, like the frat house feel, but also I feel like they did a really good job of making it feel like as much as they were in space and they were exploring, we weren't so far into that part of our development as a species that everyone was comfortable, right? It was still a very sort of inhumane way of doing things, right? Like having to be asleep for
Mhm.
so long and groggy and the food's not great and like it's still a harsh experience no matter what, right? But
Yeah.
then in the second film, clearly time has passed, right? The technology is better. You've got people who, their entire careers exist, possibly their lives exist only in space, right? And then there's that comfort level. And so it feels like, along with the alien developing and the characters developing, the whole human race is also moving along with you as you watch the films as well. And you can feel that developing in the background.
Amazing the whole way through. Yeah, okay, I'm going to drop some trivia on you guys here.
All right.
The crew stopped to investigate a repeating message. How often does the message repeat?
Every 12 seconds?
That's correct.
Oh,
Nice.
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 All right.
It's just such an odd number. Like, why
That's
12
great.
seconds?
So Brett is the first hunt and kill for the xenomorph. Who watches him die?
Jonesy?
Jones.
Or Jones, sorry. Jonesy?
Jones. No, they call
Yeah.
him Jonesy, but it's Jones.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Who is the first to wake up from hypersleep?
Was it Dallas?
No.
Oh, it's not the captain. Is it Parker?
No.
Then it's got to be Ripley then.
Nope.
I don't
It's
know.
a bit of foreshadowing.
Is it Lambert?
It's a bit of foreshadowing because he's also the first to die.
Oh, it's Kane. Oh, right. It is Kane. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Kane is the first to die.
He is.
Okay, I've got one more here for you guys. And this is not alien related. It's a Harry Dean Stanton trivia question.
Nice. Okay.
But because I love that guy.
Me too.
Harry Dean Stanton was in this 1984 science fiction comedy alongside Emilio Estevez.
Oh,
This used to be I used to watch this movie.
I
all
can
the time.
see it. Why can't I think of the name of it? No, I no.
Let's go. Let's go get sushi and not pay.
Yeah, no, I know. Oh, this is gonna kill me. And you of all people proposing this question, it hurts twice as bad. Yeah, sorry, man.
I'm totally lost. No idea.
It's a one of a kind film. Repo Man.
Repo Man, of course it
By
is.
Alex Cox. Remember that, Sam? It was like a punk rock, kind of like LA punk rock.
That's I do. I can even picture the movie poster too.
Yeah.
Sam,
Estevez.
Tristan has spent more time talking to me about Repo Man than he maybe has talked to you at all in your entire life. And I can't believe.
There's a few of us that we used to watch it on repeat and recite all the lines because there's so many good one lines in that film.
True.
That's funny.
So many.
Yeah. I do have one because I don't know. I ended up bringing one to the table on Fury 161, the prison planet that the third movie takes place on. It's populated by males that have an extra what?
Chromosome?
Yeah. I found that the first time I watched it, I kind of like this sort of passed me by, but yeah, the focus of that entire colony planet was that it's made up of males that are specifically have an extra Y chromosome.
And I believe that they're all sorry to say, but murderers and rapists.
Well, they are, and it's the thing that I found out was that so it's also known as like XYY syndrome or Jacobs syndrome, which is a real thing, and actually quite common. Like 1 in 1,000 males born has this genetic trait, and in certain cases, it's it leads to maybe you being a bit taller, possibly, and in certain cases also having like certain like learning delays or disabilities, possibly in very, very rare cases. But one of the things that they used to think, which they now know is no longer true, is that it actually led to violent behavior. And so that being the impetus for the reason that this is the focus of the prison planet was based on like completely bunk science, and was just sort of the subtext of it. They don't focus on it a lot, but it's something that I thought was kind of interesting.
I'm a huge fan of Alien 3. It gets a lot of flack. Apparently, it was a little bit of a bomb, but there's again, it's in its own category. There's no other film like it. It's visually beautiful. It's dark. It's creepy. You're surrounded by horrible people with a couple of trustworthy characters. It's just as scary. Like, and also it broadens the canon of the universe with the Wayland Corp, and Bishop returns, or the Wayland, who obviously Bishop from the Aliens was designed in his image, which is also a symbolism of the god that Wayland thinks he is. It's so
It
full
also
of
it
amazing
progresses
stuff.
the biology as well, right? Like it shows that the alien can incubate and develop within something that is not a human, and that if it does, that actually impacts
The
its
cow, right?
form. It's a dog, right?
Right, the dog, right.
Yeah, he gets inside the dog, which as a dog lover, oh man, tell me that hurt. There's actually, you know what? There's actually two things in that movie that like are the reason why I try not to watch it too often. One is the like absolute bummer of the introduction where you find out that Hicks and Newt died
Yeah.
like basically immediately after the second movie. Like you celebrate that they all survived, and then if you did what I did, which is roll right into the third one, which you shouldn't do, you, you find out that no, in fact, they didn't at all. But yeah, that and the dog, I'm like, oh man, that's rough. Not to mention the death of Charles Dance, which happens like kind of out of nowhere, and he's the only one you really like. He's the doctor,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, that's enough of my digression.
Well, I have one. I was going over my factoids, and we've covered all of them, so I only really have one trivia question for you. Tom Skerritt, who plays Dallas, the captain, originally turned down the role. What brought him back to the movie?
Was it Ridley
Money.
You're both a little bit right, but Ryan, you're more right. It was Ripley came on, and that ended up raising the budget, and then Skerritt decided to come back.
Oh, okay, nice,
yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, he was
Yeah,
he was a big deal, right? Like
He'd been in a few, yeah.
that was peak Skerritt time, right?
It really
Peak
was.
Skerritt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That was good.
Well, I just think Skerritt was watchable his entire career, right? Like if I knew he was in a film, like it didn't. I mean, I didn't need him to be the lead. He often wasn't. But it, like for growing up,
felt
in
comfortable
in the 80s,
with him.
Yeah, he lent a credibility to the film, right? You saw him in an era, it's like, okay, I'll watch this. I'll try it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and as a lover of MASH, like a deep love of MASH.
Oh yeah,
in my body. Yeah, just love to see it. And like I don't know, I already this is the second reference to Top Gun, but like my father loves two movies, and it's Top Gun and Jaws. So I've seen them more times than I can count. And Scare brings it for sure. Top Gun.
So as you have heard, we're going through the alphabet in the film club here. We've started off with Alien, and yeah, you already guessed it. We're watching Blade Runner.
Nice.
And I just I also want the disclaimer that I like, these are two, they're probably, Alien definitely is one of my favorite films. Blade Runner, it's in there. Yeah, it's one of them. It's a little bit lower. I like Alien a little more. But I don't think there's any other Ridley Scott films that I'm that excited about. I always want to like his movies, but I find them, they just don't do it for me. So I think this Ridley Scott guy hit 2 home runs in his first season, and he's just been, they're either just walking this guy or he's striking out. I don't know what's going on, but he's not hitting anything for me. So that's the harshest thing I'll say about Ridley Scott, but I love Blade Runner. I'm looking forward to doing a review, watch the director's cut, and talk about that next episode.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
Thank you for joining us today. We very much appreciate you being here with us. Is Alien one of your favorite films? Yeah? I bet Blade Runner's up there too, isn't it? Yeah. Well, join us for that one. Go back and check out older episodes if you haven't yet. We talk to some amazing authors and filmmakers, and we chat books all the time, so go back and look at our episodes. Until next time.